Hi, I'm Douglas Vogt from the Diehill Foundation. And this is video series 4, part 4G. I didn't think it was going to be this many parts to section 4, and I apologize for the numbering system. I'll try to do better or try to label it better. This one is basically, you can look at it as part 2 to the previous one, 4F. Where I try to explain why the Earth's rotation stops and then goes in the other direction. And my son said I should have done a better job. He figured out what I was trying to say. Few people have, but I should have done a better job. So in that respect, I actually thank my critics who left comments, and because it just made me a better scientist, and that's really what it's all about. So I try to make it as plain as I can, and I think I made some major breakthroughs. I have really figured out what I've got here, and I'm quite proud of it because no one in history has been able to do it, and I was able to do it with this information theory of existence. Couldn't do it with any other way, and that's why no one else ever figured it out. Anyway, here we go. Now, the latest version of the philosophies in this book, Theory of Multidimensional Reality. As of this date, I think it's the 22nd of March, 2019, and I think Amazon still has about 35 or 40 copies left. It's in the printer to be printed some more. If they run out, just put it on hold, and you'll get more as soon as the printer gets done with it. I'm going to print about 500 of them and send most of them to Amazon. The other one, you're going to find out why this is so important. For some of you who think I'm trying to preach Judaism, that's not the issue here. This is a science book. More importantly, it gives you a glimpse of a technology from a people that was literally tens of millions of years more advanced than us. Abraham and Moses, who pulled the two plates out, merely found them deep in the cave. That's how they came about. He didn't find them on top of the hill. When I get to volume 3, the video for there, you're going to see all the altars and stuff like that. You'll know I know what happened. Anyway, the same principle that's in here explains what I'm going to be covering in a few minutes. Einstein's quote is really interesting. He knew this was one of the 5 most important phenomena in the universe that physicists had to figure out. This is the model that we're currently taught in school. They see it as a big bar magnet here, and the information going around like this into the North Pole. We call it the south, goes into the north. So, but it's wrong. It's not a bar magnet here. I explained it in the previous video, and one other one. There was 5 good reasons this doesn't exist. There's no way, and you'll understand why in a few minutes. Let me see. The video here is going to explain the principle behind what happens in the center of the Earth is also the same thing that goes in the center of the sun. And it's also matched to the atom. In other words, the philosophy that creates this is a hydrogen atom, and this is 256 picometers, which is a trillionth of a meter. Really, where the real business is going on is right here. You don't see that part. You can only see this part. Supposed electron shell. Not really. You're going to understand later. What goes on in the center of this that brings an atom into this dimension is the same principle that's in the center of the Earth and the center of the sun, or any star. It's not exclusive to this. Every planet, every star. It's all in the same system. We're back to my famous or infamous graph. This is the information in the second dimension. When it crosses this imaginary x-axis, it bursts out not one frequency, but thousands of frequencies that make up the atoms. Maybe hydrogen only has less than 1,000, but iron has 4,200 at least. In fact, the National Bureau of Standards says they recorded 20,000. So This could be a proton, that could be a neutron. We could also call this Planck's constant. And you'll notice when it changes polarity, you have a spike here or you have a spike here, positive or negative. As the atom, single atom comes in, this really represents just the carrier wave, not all the frequencies that's strapped onto the carrier wave. And you'll see an actual model of where you can maybe understand it a lot better. And of course, it's a modified square wave. Here's xenon, radon, another very, very heavy element, number 118. This is where you're looking. With all the business really going on in the center of these things, and it radiates electrostatic shell, various shells around it. We call it the electron shells. It's not really electrons. As the Heisenberg uncertainty principle was, you can't say any spot where that electron is. It's both a wave and they think a particle. It's not a particle. It's more like a wave. Here's a gold atom. Supposedly 79 electrons around this whole thing. You don't see the center. Here's actually 20 nanometers gold atoms. And some are further away. This is closer to the focal point than the ones back here. These, you're not seeing the center of the gold atom. You're seeing this kind of a shell produced by this information, which is a lot of information, being blinked in and out of existence at, we assume, Planck's time. That's why you see this. Here's iron. Iron has 26 electrons, and as I said, I have a manual, a Russian manual of spectral line frequencies. And it goes back to, I think, the early 70s. And they recorded a little less than 4,200. National Bureau of Standards has well over 20,000. I haven't gone through all of them or looked at them, but what's important is here. This is the spectrum, the light spectrum, only in our visible spectrum, which is like 350 or 400 nanometers on the ultraviolet, to the infrared, which is about 700 nanometers. That's a lot. But you'll also notice some are much brighter than others, which are just a faint line. I assume you could see it on your TV. All the way from the ultraviolet to the infrared. And this is only a small part. You have a lot. Now, current theory is this. You immediately know they're wrong. Supposedly, a spectral line in the spectrum is produced when an electron jumps from one shell to the other. Now, 26 electrons did not create over 4,200 spectral lines. There's no way. So right off the bat, you know, that theory of theirs is wrong. That may be why the nuclear physicists took another branch and decided to do subatomic particles, which I think is just basically leading them to a dead end. And I think some of them know it already. I mean, they had to resurrect the ether theory and call it the what do they call it? The Higgs field. And all they did was remove the speed part of the ether theory to try to make this thing work. You really can't do that, but logically, they thought it was a great idea. All of the light spectrums look like the information is both pulse modulated as well as amplitude modulated. Amplitude meaning how much brighter some spectral lines are than others, and it's all digital. So you got amplitude modulated and pulse modulated. Notice this faint line has less information, code, in it than the brighter ones. Now we're getting to the guts of this thing and why square waves I've chosen and stuff like that. And when you have multiple sine waves of different frequencies, when you accumulate them, they start appearing like a square wave. This is only 3 frequencies. You'll notice they all line up, they're all supposed to line up, and they drew it correctly, to when it flips. This would be the x-axis across here. Here's an example of up to 7 harmonics. They have different colors. The blue is just 1 harmonic, 1 frequency. It's a sine wave. But as you start multiplying at 7 harmonics, it starts looking more and more like a square wave. This black line I put in is where it'd be crossing the x-axis, where in my theory, it's then creating the atom. Here is 11 harmonics, more frequencies. Looks more and more like a square wave. And then finally, 19 harmonics, even more so. Back to the model. What I think in the third dimension, each element has its own carrier wave. I don't think they would slap all of them in one. It'd be too much information, and I don't know how they'd separate them. It makes more sense to have, in the third dimension, each individual element would have its own square wave. Now, as it comes through time, as I shown in the previous video, and the principle behind it, it takes the path of a toroid. And the reason because it is a function of how the information is transmitted and the delay in propagation. So it appears as a toroid. In this line here, when it crosses this, is when it winds up creating an atom physically in this dimension. When it goes around like this, it's not really there, it's just the information. When it crosses here, it creates the other side of the atom 180 degrees out of phase from it. Just remember that basic principle. Same principle you're going to see in a second. This is a side view. This, by the way, in the Hebrew alphabet, this is Pei. This is Nun. Now, Moses did that. He took 22 views of this waveform, and he wound up coming up with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which represents a programming language that this highly advanced civilization had. So he must have been shown this model. The real question is, how much information does a planet have directed towards the center? By my theory, a planet is a 7th dimensional existence, so it has all the information from the 3rd to the 7th dimension directed to its center modulation point. In other words, you've got 5 different dimensions, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, being directed to a point in time and space. Now, this model actually comes from well-known knowledge of toroidal inductors and transformers. We've known how they work and the principles behind them for over 100 years. And it's basically the same thing, except I don't know how wide this space is in the center of a planet. It may only be a few miles wide. It could be longer. And also the other differences are, this is not, in a toroid inducer or transformer, it's an iron core usually. And there's wire around the thing, wrapped around the thing, which creates an electrical field, goes from south to north. So, but in this case, it's that information going around this, tracing out a toroidal shape as it goes very fast around here. But some frequencies are slower. You're going to find out in a minute. And I'll go further. We know the Earth exhibits a dipole magnetic field. This is this, created by a toroid. This creates a toroidal or donut-shaped field as the direction of the field propagates towards, from the south, enters through the north. Next question is, how much information is contained in the 3 through 7 dimension? You have to think in terms of hundreds of millions or perhaps billions of frequencies, all being directed to multiple points in time and space that is tracing out a toroid as it comes into existence. In other words, that toroid model I showed you, hell, I have it here, what do you know? Here's our toroid, where I showed it entered here and there for a 3rd dimensional object. But 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th, there may be multiples of these, and I believe it probably starts and comes in at different points. Remember, this is happening at Planck's time, that fast. So you have this circular motion as these other dimensions modulate into our existence. The resulting magnetic field must be pulsing at different times down to Planck's time. In other words, I'll show you in a few minutes, you have the sunspot cycles, you have other cycles. These are literally cycles imposed upon cycles that a piece of information like that makes up a planet, for instance, has, that we don't have. This is an example of what I'm about to show you. The 2500, this is the title of the journal, 2500-year cycle in atmospheric radiocarbon concentration, bispectrum of carbon-14 dating over the last 8,000 years. Russian journal, 2 Russian scientists, that's where they are from. Abstract. We have carried out power spectrum, time spectrum, and bispectrum analysis of the long-term series of the radiocarbon concentrations deduced from measurements of the radiocarbon content in tree rings for the last 8,000 years. Classical harmonic analysis of this time series. When he said that, he's not accepting the crap that the archaeologists did in Europe, where they had calibrated the carbon-14 dating. They're not accepting it. Shows a number of periods, 2400, 940, 710, 570, 500, go on. The reason I highlighted these, you'll see in a second, they're significant. A principal feature of the time series is the long period of 2400 years, which is well known. This is what I found. In carbon-14 dating, you could have a standard deviation of 30, 50 years, sometimes 100 years, plus or minus. So, with that in mind, what I did was, the numbers they gave me, I said, how far off would it be to go into 12,068? So the number would be 2,414 years, well within the standard deviation of carbon-14 dating. An error of only 0.005 of the percent. This is the only one that was highest. Instead of 940, it's 928 years times 13 gives you, hey, the clock cycle. This one, 710 years, was the same as what they came up with. Error factor of 0.002 thousandths of a percent off. 575 years instead of 570 years, 8 thousandths of a percent off. 24 of them is 12,068 years. 500 years, an error factor of only 2%, 2 thousandths of a percent off. 24 times 500, the 12,068 years. Gleisberg cycle, 136 of them, gives you 12,068 years. Sunspot cycle, 11.09, actually 0919 goes on. Years, 1,088 equals the same clock cycle. All of these are synced to the main clock cycle. So here's your proof. You got 7 examples here. Each one of these have a separate square wave with information in them. Prove my point. The reason they were able to find these things, these dates, these two, last Gleisberg cycle I show you, the sun went nuts. December 1958, 355 sunspots in over 2 or 3 days. I mean, that's going nuts. In other words, when this is a separate clock cycle imposed in the bigger clock cycle, and when it crosses that x-axis, it makes a spike of energy. We see it as the Gleisberg cycle, sunspot cycle, and all these they found them because of the increase in carbon-14 on the tree rings. That's how they found them. So you know it was the sun that all of a sudden did something. So that's what I've represented here. Now, every one of these across an x-axis, like instead of 12,000 years, it's 2,414 years it crosses, creates a spike of energy when it crosses the x-axis. But it didn't change rotation. We have another clock cycle, probably associated with the planet only, a 7th dimensional existence. We don't know if it's shared with the sun, but wait, it has to be, because it novas. Whether it changes rotation, I don't know. Now remember, when it crosses the x-axis, the imaginary x-axis, creates a spike of energy, but it changes sign, which means it changes direction, changes rotation. It's this clock cycle that the other ones don't have. It changes rotation. That's why the Earth stops its rotation and then goes the other way. This little line here represents 7 or 8 hours. And then it flips, and that's what we got. Nobody has ever figured that out, the mechanism. Here's our Earth's magnetic field, which I've shown before. This thing will flip. Sometimes you'll see some parts of the field lighter than others. Sometimes strange, looks like it's moving around. The reason is there's probably convection currents, but it's not producing any voltage to speak of to create the Earth's magnetic field. What probably is, it's like, we know it's a lot of nickel iron in there, but probably on the outside. This is a center modulation point, not a solid core. This is more like a plasma. And this is just too much information. This is a plasma where it's kind of not quite matter, information matter, pops in and out of existence. It's a plasma. Here it becomes finally real hot matter. Unfortunately, we live on the crust. So basically, this model is wrong. What I'm saying is in the center is correct. The three reasons we know that we have a toroidal shape in the center of the Earth is for three major reasons. One, when they first started putting up satellites in currently, when it crosses within 5 degrees of the Earth's equator, they had a big spike of radio noise, static. If you had a spectrum analyzer and you analyze the static, you probably figure out how many frequencies are coming from the center. It's got to be propagating from the center of this thing, and it's not an iron core. That alone, you can tell, you take the iron core theory and throw it in the garbage. That's really where it belongs. It should have never been taught. Second reason, the DE, F1 and F2 layers in the ionosphere, they're electrostatic fields. And it actually gets hotter in some of these fields. And we bounce radio frequencies off of them. They exist, and it's all over the world, uniformly around the world. The only way that can be is something's going on, that pulsing action in the center of the Earth. And I don't know how big this toroid is, whether the opening in the middle, the donut part, is a few miles wide, 100 miles wide, and the outside, I don't know. Nobody can know. There is a way. If you blew a pretty big bomb at the South Pole and you had detectors on the North Pole, you might be able to figure it out by the echo that comes around it. Third item is the Van Allen belts. The reason why they drew it like a toroid is because that's reflecting the toroid that creates it, not a solid iron core in the middle. So that's it. Got it? So you got 3 ways for sure that you know I'm right. You got a toroid, you got tremendous amount of information being blinked in and out of existence in that toroid. Not all at the same time, but a lot of different times, producing a huge electrical field. Anyway, here's our dear sweet sun. It has even more information. That's why it's so much bigger. I mean, the Earth would be about the size of my finger here, and this thing, you can imagine, like I told you, it's an exponential increase in information and energy. We can only guess how much, but that's probably what's going on in the middle of this thing. And that's probably why you have the excitation areas above and below. It kind of reflects a toroid going on in here and broadcasting it out. Final question is, why does the Earth's rotation and then stop at the time of the reversal and then rotate in the opposite direction? Again, physically, The square box like this represents the first 4 dimensions. First is information, so that you have the line there, but you can't see it. It's in the dihold. The second is a transmission dimension. Third dimension is this stuff, rocks, this is an asteroid, inanimate objects. We're fourth, dumb, stupid humans. Anything that's a living, fourth dimensional existence. Matter with a consciousness broadcast at the same time and space at the same time. Remember what I said? We're really a soul that occasionally takes on a body. That's what we are. So, this different pattern here, imagine an infinite number going all around this thing, popping in and out, various frequencies. The 7 I showed you, and God knows how many hundreds there also are that have just to do with the sun. And I don't know how many of the Earth, but anyway, the reason I think this thing rotates in a certain way, it has to do with the direction of information. So I look at it coming from the North Pole. That's why I took the letters and went counterclockwise to this thing. And while we're basically, if you look at the North Pole, we're also turning counterclockwise. So I think it fires off, well, really from 2, 3, 4, and then it's 5, 6, 7, 8 for a star. Otherwise it'd be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 as it goes around. Those are the major ones. Within each one, I have no idea how much information is there. All I know is it's an exponential increase over 6, and that's exponential over 5, etc. over 4, and keeps going. Anyways, this isn't an easy thing to figure out. That's why no one ever did until you have the right philosophy of how the universe really works. One of the carriaways of the clock frequency of 12,068. Now, I don't know if it's associated with the 7th dimension or the 8th dimension. I think I said a few minutes ago, thinking about it, it has to be because the sun does nova at the same time. So it's common for both. Or if it's broadcast to the 7th, the 8th has it because it inherits it from the 7th. What do you get? On the Pacific coast, you're going to get this. On the Atlantic coast, you're going to get this. If you're standing there on the East Coast, and when this thing happens, you're going to see the oceans rushing away from you real fast. And then you'll be comforted to know that the Pacific's rushing towards you also. You also get our favorite ice age. This could be New York City right here, 4,000 or 5,000 feet down. Point being is, for those in the electric universe or plasma theory, around these toroids, this toroid in the center of the Earth as well as the center of the sun, a tremendous amount of voltage is being created. It's creating the magnetic field, but you have to think in terms, you can't have the electric field, the electrostatic field, or the plasma, unless you have the information that makes up the matter come into this dimension. That's the key part. That's the part you're missing. Now, some of you will be able to incorporate what I've given you in this information theory of existence, the theory of multidimensional reality, at least get it right, to explain some of the phenomena you think you found with plasmas and stuff like that. Some of it you're absolutely correct. But don't hang on to think that everything you've thought is right with those theories. You didn't know this stuff. Nobody did, so don't feel bad about it. It's like I said, the quantum mechanics, some is right, some is wrong. String theory, some is correct, some is not correct. It's okay. You know, we're just starting out in this thing. We're as primitive as you can get. This was interesting and it has to do with humans, so I'm going to read it and mention it to you. Why is the Earth's Schumann resonance accelerating? By Kathy Forte, PhD. She's a psychologist. For many years, this resonance frequency has hovered at a steady 7.83 hertz, which was only slight variations. In June of 2000, by the way, this is the body cycle of people, of your brain. Now I hope I got your attention. In June 2014, that apparently changed. Monitors at the Russian Space Observing System, I think she really observatory, not the observing system, showed a sudden spike in activity of around 8.5 hertz. Okay, what does this mean? Why are we getting a frequency like this in the center of the Earth? Remember that toroid model? What I think it means is that information in one of those major clock cycles takes 8.5 turns around in 1 second. That's what a hertz would be. How many frequencies in 1 second? So it's going around this thing that could be 100 miles wide or I don't know, 8.5 times. Since then, they have recorded days where the Schumann accelerated as fast as 16.5 hertz. At first, they thought their equipment was malfunctioning, but later learned that the data was accurate. Everyone has asked, what's causing this intermittent spiking activity? It has something to do with the information going to the planet. But from what dimension it's leaking through, I don't know if it's from fifth dimensional beings, sixth dimensional beings, I don't know. I think in terms of information is speeding as it travels around the toroid. This is my comment I put in square brackets. Is the Earth's frequency speeding up? Since the Schumann's frequency is said to be in tune with the human brain's alpha and theta states, this acceleration may be why it often feels like time has sped up and events and changes in our life are happening more rapidly. I thought it was just old age. These emerging resonances are naturally occurring to humans' brainwaves activity. So this means we are changing. Schumann resonance has had sudden spikes between 12 to 16.5 hertz. In neurofeedback, 12 to 15 hertz is called sensory motor rhythm frequency. It is an ideal state of awakened calm. Our thought processes are clearer and more focused. Maybe God did this. So we're supposed to get smarter and think about what's happening around us to help save us from this event so we could survive it. Well, in that case, I have some small part in that. Dihole Foundation is 501c3. The foundation, the contributions we get is to hire geologists to get more information, more proof to try to get the politicians and others to do something. Otherwise, folks, I have no idea how you're going to survive this thing. There's a hard way and the easy way, and I believe the next video will be part 5 of this series. I will go into that. It'll have 2 parts to it. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sure you'll learn something from it. And now you know why the Earth is slowing down, why it will stop, and then reverse polarity and reverse direction.